I'm Nicole, and this is Remakes, Reboots, and Revivals, an original podcast about unoriginality. And today is part 2 on Wallace and Gromit. As you saw in the last episode, if you turned in, it's just me this time. Just me going solo. And I'll be talking to you about the new film, Vengeance Most Fowl, which as of January 3rd, 2025, is available on Netflix in America. If you are a UK listener, you probably saw this in theaters and you've probably seen this a very, very long time ago. And maybe you'll be charmed by my unique American perspective on this. So as I said before, Wallace and Gromit is a truly beloved British stop-motion animated franchise created by Nick Park of Aardman Animations. Wallace is an eccentric, cheese-obsessed inventor, and he has a very loyal, resourceful, and brilliant dog named Gromit. Now, Wallace, he's a big dreamer, right? He's the ultimate Pisces, let's say. And Gromit is a silent dog, but he is endlessly expressive, and he often saves the day, navigating the chaos that Wallace's well-meaning but often disastrous experiments tend to create. And so, Wallace and Gromit, as I said in the last episode, started off in 1989 with A Grand Day Out, was followed by a sequel, The Wrong Trousers, in 1993, and 1995's A Clean Shave. They did the film, their first foray into feature film, with Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit, in 2005. They did one more short film, A Matter of Loaf and Death, in 2008. And lo and behold, here we are in 2025, but we're talking about 2024's Vengeance Most Fowl, which is a direct legacy sequel to The Wrong Trousers, which is kind of crazy. It's 31 years between the two films. And this is why this qualifies as a revival, right? This is the long-awaited return of Feathers McGraw, who is, I think, one of the greatest comic villains in media history. Before I talk about Vengeance Most Fowl, though, I do want to talk a little bit about The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. It was a huge success when it came out. It won the Best Animated Feature award at the Academy Awards. The experiences that Nick Park had on the Were-Rabbit film were not a good one. Wallace and Gromit and The Curse of the Were-Rabbit was funded by DreamWorks, and according to Nick Park, DreamWorks had a lot to say in the final cut and decision-making of that film. They did some test screenings with both British and American audiences, and DreamWorks demanded that he make some adjustments to the way that the characters spoke to be more for American audiences. They were instructed to include more American jokes into it, and he felt really stressed by this. He went on record saying the whole experience completely turned him off from wanting to make another Wallace and Gromit feature-length film, especially one with DreamWorks. One note that he recalled was that Wallace's car should be trendier, which Nick Park completely rejected. And he said that, no, actually, the fact that it's more old-fashioned makes it look even more ironic with the fact that he's in this inventor, right? A contrast. The fact that there was all this behind-the-scenes tension and stress is not seen in The Were-Rabbit. And it's funny that he says that it was adjusted to appease more to an American audience. I remember loving that film when it came out, rewatched it recently, and I still think it holds up. But the fact that there were these inserts that would appease, my type of humor, quote unquote, so to speak, I kind of feel it, especially when you compare it to this next film, because I think that Vengeance Most Fowl is distinguishingly more British. There were a lot of jokes that I didn't get, and they were clearly put for a British audience, but it also just didn't feel like there was much interference. It really felt like an extended version of one of their short films, which is often, simpler and cuter in its form. The Were-Rabbit story is one of the most complex ones. And although I very much enjoy it, I now that I know all this stuff about it, I see it. I see the influence it had. I think as an American, it ended up being a good influence. I don't think there's any Wallace and Gromit property that is a bad one. If you are familiar with media, then you are probably familiar with the term jump the shark. Well, I don't think Wallace and Gromit have jumped the shark. I think that they have, throughout the course of 35, 36 years, they've stayed true to, the fundamentals of what their dynamics are and what their stories and their misadventures typically look like. Wallace and Gromit, Vengeance Most Fowl. Here's a little bit of a synopsis. 62 West Wallaby Street is still very much inhabited by Wallace and Gromit, except now it's even more of a high tech, cheese themed bed and breakfast, complete with all sorts of automated contraptions to prepare Wallace's meals, to tidy their rooms. And Wallace invents a robotic garden gnome called Norbit. And he actually creates a business hiring out people to these robots to work in people's gardens. Gromit, who is an avid gardener and wants to do things on his own pace, is a little displeased by this new gnome. Now, at the same time, Feathers McGraw, who has been apprehended in his prison, which is actually a zoo, sees Wallace and Norbert on television, and the mischievous and brilliant villain, Feathers McGraw, is able to hack into Wallace's computer and reprogram Norbert to serve Feathers and to serve him and provide him with this whole army of gnomes. And from there, chaos ensues in traditional Wallace and Gromit misadventure fashion. So one of the big things is that Feathers McGraw is able to hack into Wallace's robots and reprogram them. And there's certainly a certain charm in Wallace's overtly simple password protection system. The fact that he allows other people to access it, or that he gives himself this whole password system, is very, very silly. And if you get the password right, which, by the way, spoiler alert, there's 3 attempts at it, and Feathers is like, "Is it Gromit? Hmm. Is it Wallace? No, it's cheese." He gets in, and then there's this custom greeting that Wallace is like, "Welcome to my computer." If you think about it, why would Wallace make that? He's the only one using it. So, but maybe he put it that every time he accesses it, he himself has to add a password, and then he greets himself with this. It's so silly and so charming, but it adds to this whole thing about, Wallace being kind of simple in a very charming way. I also found the film to be, like I said, distinctly British in its humor. There was a joke uh, that I looked up, or if you go on Letterboxd and you read some of the reviews, people are like, "Oh, that Ant and Deck joke was really, really funny," or "I wonder if other people got it." I didn't get it. I got the on your doorstep one because obviously, that's a pretty international joke, but I don't know who Ant and Deck are. So there were little things like that that I was like, I feel like I'm not in on this joke. Having said that, though, it did not interfere with my enjoyment of the film because overall the story is very similar to the same beats of The Wrong Trousers. It's almost like they took the Wrong Trousers template and the story structure and they just expanded on it. Now, in The Wrong Trousers, when the penguin comes in, Feathers McGraw comes in and kind of, upends Gromit's life, it happens on his birthday. And in this new film, it's not Gromit's birthday, but nonetheless, Gromit feels like his life is being upended. Now, not by Feathers McGraw at the moment. He thinks it's by Norbert and all of this endless army of gnomes. And Wallace is incredibly trusting of these gnomes, but Gromit is very unsure about them and very suspecting of them. And he keeps his eye on them and he feels like they are interfering with his life and with Wallace's life, that they can't be trusted. And if you think about it, yes, there's always something like, oh, Gromit knows that something's bad, Wallace doesn't. Gromit's going to save him from himself and from his own inventions and whatnot. But there's actually this deeper tension going on between like technology and artificial intelligence. Like Wallace's invention, even though it's clever and it's saving them a lot of time, it's actually getting rid of the whole like human touch, and it's easily reprogrammable to be evil. The joke too being like, oh, when Feathers is able to reprogram them, there's a bunch of things like, oh, you could be really nasty or really good, and he programs it to be evil. So a lot of people are saying that like one of the surprising things about this film is that at the core, it is this kind of film about the dangers of artificial intelligence, and it almost feels kind of like Nick Park just recently watched The Terminator and was like, yeah, wow, these robots can be easily programmed to then, be our enemy and to want to get rid of us and want to do away with human beings and whatnot. I wasn't suspecting it to kind of be like this AI kind of manifesto or anti AI manifesto, but I was for it. On the other side, at the core too, is just like all Gromit wants is to be loved and to be recognized. Like there's this moment where he's like, "Oh, you're such a good pup, I'm gonna give you some loving," and he goes to like pat him on the head, but then he comes up with an invention that will pat Gromit on his head for him. And Gromit does not want that. Gromit wants Wallace to, recognize him and to give him that human touch and to pat him on his head and tell him that he's a good dog. That's all he wants. That's all he ever wants. That's all. Gromit only wants to be loved by Wallace and wants to have that friendship, recognized with love and respect. And when Wallace doesn't give it to him and instead has an invention done that, takes the place of him, that completely lacks the human touch, quite literally, it's actually pretty sad. I was watching it with my partner. We were both like, "Oh my god, poor Gromit." It's the statement too, like we're losing these human connections with one another, with even with our pets. We're coming up with all these gadgets that could take care of their needs, but there are things that specifically human beings can take care of ourselves and that we need to take care of with other living creatures, especially our pets. We shouldn't have to rely on these gadgets and these technologies to take care of them for us. I'll tell you right now, spoiler alert, Wallace gives him that pat on the head. I mean, it's like it was my favorite part of the film, and it was probably my favorite ending of any of the Wallace and Gromit films. He just tells him he's a good boy, and he gives him that pat on the head, and it's just so heartwarming and so precious. And it really speaks true to the dynamic of how important a dog is to a person, but how important a person is to a dog. Just tell them that they're a good boy. It's so sweet. Oh, I thought it was so cute. The visual gags to the puns and to the wordplay, like on your doorstep. I thought it was very much in the tradition of the old-fashioned Wallace and Gromit stories. Where Rabbits felt like a step up for them and felt like it felt like a movie. It had this whole plot and a villain and all of these things to it that felt just so classically Hollywood. And this film didn't feel that way. And that's one of the nice things about it. Like I said, it just felt like a little bit of a longer short film in those fashions where it was simpler and it was cuter. And again, it also felt more British in that way, but I'm glad that I didn't feel that interference from, a studio, because when I looked back on The War Rabbit, I felt that interference. I felt all of those notes being barked into Nick Park's ears and telling him to change it to make it appeal to a more American audience. So I don't really feel like there was much interference on Netflix's part in Vengeance Most Fowl. I think that Netflix really just acted as a distributor, particularly for America, but this was more so done for a British audience, and it kept more in line with who Wallace and Gromit really are. And that, I think, is rare these days, once you kind of like have to adhere to a studio's demands and change a property for them, you kind of lose track of it. But Nick Park was able to keep his hands on it and to keep his own human touch on it, which is kind of appropriate. I find it all to be so irresistibly cute with Gromit's loyal bravery. He's always cleverly thwarting Feathers McGraw and his schemes, or he's rolling his eyes at Wallace's oblivious optimism. He's just so expressive, and my heart just always goes out to him in any of these films. Wallace's naivete is always just so hilarious. The running gag of him not realizing that that's feathers with the rubber glove on is just always going to be funny to me. All of the whimsical gadgets in the world that they create is just so overly complicated, but such a delight to watch. And the creativity behind, how they all came up with these gadgets. You kind of want to do live in a house like that, and I'm glad that now Wallace has concocted a way for him to take a bath, because in the wrong trousers, he just got up out of bed and put his clothes on. I was like, Wallace, you're probably stinky guy. You need to take a bath. So I'm glad that now in Vengeance Most Foul, he put that in his whole, day to day gadgetry. The fact that Wallace is in love with cheese is just so fitting, because Americans would probably look at Wallace and Gromit and say, "Oh, that's really cheesy," like cheesy and as in corny, cheesy as in very, almost too like as in too family friendly, if you will. But it indulges just 100% in that cheese factor. And if you like it, you like it. I'm one of those people who like it. It all feels like a warm hug, from its gentle humor to, it's got this new AI statement, but it's not hitting you over the head with it. It feels like no time has passed. So even though also, I had some misgivings going into it, I was like, can it be good, especially because the voice of Wallace is no longer with us. His name is Peter Sallis, and he died in June 2017. And so, how can you make another Wallace and Gromit film without the voice of Wallace, who, outside of the fact of the animation and the storylines, part of the comedy is in his performance as Wallace. He gives it a very gentle performance. I think it's a Yorkshire accent. I'm not British, but I've read about it. I don't know necessarily the different, but it doesn't sound like a London accent, right? It sounds more of suburb area of England, the everyman quality. And it's got charm. He's a little bumbling. I went on record last episode saying that I find Wallace to be rather lovable, and he actually is able to convey, a wide emotional range in his performance, like about, his excitement about cheese to his panic about no crackers to his panic about, all of his inventions going awry. And none of them sound too childish or too exaggerated. They all are perfectly done in this nice comedic tone. And so he has this really subtle comic timing in his performance that I was really concerned, will this new actor whose torch has been passed to him, can he do Wallace the justice that Peter Sallis has done for every other short film? The actor who portrayed Wallace in this, taking over from the role of Peter Sallis, his name is Ben Whitehead. He did a remarkable job. I mean, he sounds just like him. That impression of Wallace is just chef's kiss. I mean, I didn't even know at first that the original Wallace had died. So Ben Whitehead, kudos to you because you are keeping Wallace alive. You did a great job. There's other supporting characters in this, like the chief inspector, and there is PC Mukherjee. They're cute. They don't really add much to the film, and they don't take away from it either. They're kind of there to support. Although I can't say that this is my new favorite Wallace and Gromit film, I definitely think it's a lovely addition to it. This is like a childhood favorite or just like a warm, nostalgic favorite for you. Check it out. This will not ruin the canon of the Wallace and Gromit franchise for you at all. It's a perfectly lovely addition to it. I mean, no complaints, no notes, really. I thought it was very charming. Again, not my favorite, and I don't think they've reached new plateaus with it. They've just kind of maintained what we like about it. And sometimes that's all you want is just another, lovely addition to a already solid and solidified franchise. So, Vengeance Most Fowl on Netflix. What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Reach out, write a review on Apple Podcast, rate us on Spotify, all that shenanigans. We do love to hear from you and we love to hear your thoughts. So like, subscribe, do what you got to do on this video. And until next time, stay original.